Well, thank you very much. It's wonderful to be here today. I really feel humbled to be invited to come talk about these things, which are very near and dear to me. Um, so particularly thanks to the Holocaust Center. I want to thank everyone who's come online today. I understand there's a good online group as well. And I just wanted to say the work that we're going to be discussing today is a collective effort, not only the poetry and the translations, but the making of the poetry. You know, we're all connected and we're all a big community. And in many ways, in the words of Isaac Newton, we stand on the shoulders of giants. So, you know, just in terms of what we're going to be talking about today, I'll be talking about my mother, Dr. Sarah Traister Moskovitz. She was very big on the Traister. This was something that was very important to her. And if you look on the Song Remains website, you'll see there's a whole video about what the word Traister means. It means comforter, someone who comforts other people. And she viewed this as being an important part of her life. And her legacy was to comfort people. We'll talk about Mom. I'll call her Sarah and Mom alternately, so I hope that's okay with everyone. We'll talk about the first poetry collection that she translated, which was called Poetry in Hell. And then we'll talk about the second poetry collection, The Song Remains. And I guess if you have something burning, raise your hand and we can talk about it. But otherwise, please save your questions for the end and we'll involve that in a discussion. Sorry, Ernie, do you want me to speak more loudly? Okay, cool, thank you. Good, is that better? A little bit more? Okay. I don't want to be too booming. Okay, but first, let's talk about the Yiddish language. I mean, you like to assume that everyone knows about the Yiddish language, but I'll just give you a really quick review. On the map, you'll see here a map of the Yiddish language. The Yiddish language goes back to the 9th century with roots in Middle High German. It has a very Germanic grammar, but it contains a real mishmash of all of the languages where Jews lived. So there's lots of Slavic, of course, lots of German words, many Hebrew words as well, because Yiddish was the Mama Lashon. It was the language that people spoke around the house, as opposed to Hebrew, which was Lashon HaKodesh, which is the language that people used for synagogue and for other holy contexts. As you'll see, Yiddish is written using the Hebrew alphabet, which has been slightly repurposed by Yiddish, and each of the vowels has a unique sound. Yeah, it really, from the time that the Jews entered that area in Central Europe, it really became the Jewish lingua franca, as it were. So this is my mother, Dr. Sarah Traister Moskovitz. And she is the person who translated these Yiddish poems into English, which we'll be talking about today. But I'd like to start by describing Mom and her relationship to the Yiddish language with one of her poems. And she put together a book. She was a poet herself. She wrote lots of poems in both Yiddish and English. And this is a poem that she wrote, which I'll read first in Yiddish and then in English, called Yiddish Essen, Eating Yiddish. Yiddish Eufen zu Zunge zergeht sich wie schokoladene Zuckerke mit der Geschmacken Nuss ein wenig. Ich beiß ein Yiddish mit die Zähnen und skeit sich leicht und saftig wie ein Äpfel frisch vom Bäum. Yiddish in Meul macht satt wie angebrochen Brusteckel mit Zwiebelmeeren und Kartoffel. Mein Mummichailes Jiddisch mit der Warschewer Akzent, was singt, nu, geh schon, und fragt nicht mehr verwoje. Warmt euch die Kischke wie starker Tee mit Honig arrefuhr. Süß wie Karschen, scharf wie Rein, mit Herren besalzt, mit Sechel geschmalzt, a gedichte, kräftige Suppe, mit Tam süß und Säuer, der quickend mit Leben von tausend Jörgen Deuer. Ich reiß ab ein frisch Stückel Challe und tink ein in dem Joich von Deures. Yiddish on the tongue melts like a chocolate candy with a delicious nut inside. I bite into Yiddish with my teeth, and it chews light and juicy like an apple fresh from the tree. Yiddish in my mouth satisfies like brisket, roasted long with onions, carrots, and potatoes. My auntie Chayil is Yiddish with her thick Warsaw accent that sings, go on, and let me be," warms the gut like a medicine of honey in strong tea. Sweet as cherries, sharp as horseradish, salted with tears, schmaltzed in good sense, a thick, powerful soup with tastes sweet and sour, nurturing life over 1,000 years. I tear off a piece of challah and dip into the broth of generations. So, Mom was born in Brooklyn, and she moved to Springfield, Massachusetts at an early age. She did not speak any English until she went to school, public school at age 5. Her father, Zayda Itche Traister, was a Yiddish teacher for the Yiddish Arbeitering, the Jewish workmen's circle. He was born in Warsaw and left in the late 1890s. Now, the Workmen's Circle was an anti-religious, anti-assimilationist mutual aid society that was closely associated with socialist and communist ideals. They fought for labor rights and strongly practiced Yiddish culture. Zayda Itche mellowed in his old age and became both religious in his own way and a strong supporter of Israel after losing all of his remaining Polish family in the Holocaust. Steeped in this learning and teaching, Mom got her PhD from Yeshiva University in educational psychology. She was a professor at California State University at Northridge for several decades, where she specialized in early childhood education. She was fascinated by the child survivors of the Holocaust and wrote a book, Love Despite Hate. This book was about child survivors who were liberated from the camps at the end of the war and what became of them. She also set up a number of child survivor groups, first starting in Los Angeles, where we lived, but then these groups gradually established themselves globally. And in researching this book, she had many contacts at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, and it was there that she learned about the Ringelblum Archive, which we'll talk about in a moment. Mom was a keen poet, and she wrote many chapbooks and was excited to learn that there were many poems in that Ringelblum Archive that had not really seen the light of day, and most of which had not been translated. So this is Emanuel Ringelblum, who was the founder of the Oinig Shabbos Society. He was a Polish Jewish historian, a politician, and a social worker. He was a staunch member, like most of my family, of the Linke Peil Zion, the leftist workers of Zion. He was resettled into the Warsaw Ghetto at the start of the war, and he founded the Oinig Shabbos Society, who felt that their duty was to document everything that was going on, Jewish life in the ghetto as it happened. And originally, they were going to publish a book at the end of the war to document what had happened inside the Warsaw Ghetto and how the Jews there lived and survived. However, that was not to happen. The society itself was so secret that many of the members of the society did not even know who the other members of the society were. They felt that in order for this work to continue, they needed to have complete secrecy. In the archive, there were a number of essays, diaries, drawings, posters, and critically for our purpose today, there was also lots of poetry. So the Warsaw Ghetto was sealed on 16 November 1940, and deportations began shortly thereafter. And by 1942, it became clear that the deportations were to death camps, and publishing a book would not be possible. And the goal now became to preserve this material for posterity as a dying act of resistance. The material was eventually stashed in metal boxes and milk cans and buried immediately before the final liquidation of the ghetto in April 1943. And this is where the secrecy was so critical, because in order for those locations where the material was buried, they needed to ensure that none of the Nazis really knew where it was. So part of the archive was unearthed in September 1946, and the second part by chance in 1950. And here we have Herr Schwasser pointing the way. You can see the post-war Poland, the post-war Warsaw here in the photo. And it was very hard to tell where anything was, but they did manage to find the location where that first pot of milk cans was buried. And here is Herr Schwasser pointing out the way. And this photo shows them unearthing the material. It was eventually unearthed. There's still a number of a milk can and some metal boxes that are believed to be under the Chinese embassy in Warsaw that have not been recovered. In all, there were some 35,000 documents included in the archive. So here are the milk cans and the metal boxes. The metal boxes actually leaked a bit, and so over the years, while they were buried, some of the documents became partially corrupted. The milk cans were airtight though, and the stuff that came out of the milk cans was much better. And here they are after the war, after the documents had been unearthed, classifying and analyzing the documents. So as Sarah finished up her career at Cal State University Northridge, she ramped up her research into the Ringelblum poetry. She worked with the U.S. Holocaust Museum, Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C. She made numerous trips there and eventually convinced them to lend her the microfiche, which contained the documents so that she could analyze the poetry. She worked on this project throughout the 2000s and eventually assembled a manuscript of the translated poetry with the original fragments called Poetry in Hell. She shopped this manuscript to many, many publishers. She had high hopes that Schocken, who had published Love Despite Hate, her first book, would publish the book, and for a while it looked promising, but eventually they declined. So she spent the entire of the early 2000s trying to find a way to publish this material. And eventually she approached me in frustration, because she approached everyone in frustration at that stage. And, what do you think I should do? I said, well, Mom, I think you should publish it online. If you were to publish it in print, then maybe you'd have a run of 500, 1,000 copies that would all end up in the basements of research libraries around the world, and they'd sit there gathering dust. If you publish them online, then anyone who wants to search for them can find them. Anyone who wants to know more about the poets and what they wrote, or is looking up a particular Yiddish word and wants to find out what's happening to that word in context and poetry, publishing online is a much better thing to do anyway. And so she agreed to that, and she and my dad helped transcribe all of the material into WordPress. We did that, and Poetry in Hell was launched in July of 2010. The site contains historical information about each of the poets and all of the poems that were found in the archive. There were over 150 of them. And so if you want to visit that site, it's poetryinhell.org. It's alive and very much visited. So I like to talk about some of the poets and read some of their poems. And I'll read these poems in both, some of them in English and some of them in both Yiddish and English. So the first poet that I want to talk about is Yitzchak Wiener, who wrote a poem that I'll read called My Childhood. Now, not much is known about Yitzchak Wiener, sadly. Like many of the poets, relatively unknown. There was a, sorry, this is the cover of the book. Here is the, here's a fragment of the poem that was unearthed. And it is called My Childhood. Years of childhood in balut yards, With mother and father in a poor home, I remember my hunger with friends at play. We baked breads out of muddy clay. Baking the breads, we played away hunger, the closest and worst of our unwanted guests. So passed the summer with heat in the gutters. Then winter came on with freezes and snow. Outside is grayness, sunken in snow. The roofs, the gate, are silvered and white. I lie on a bed wrapped up in rags and look through windows covered with ice. Father leaves early to ask for work. With mother, in darkness of home I stay. It's cold, we're hungry, nothing to eat. How I lust to bake a small bread loaf of clay. So that's Yitzhak. And I should say, I meant to say before, the poetry in hell is divided into a number of themes, um, which Mom had prepared into chapters, which are now sections on the website. And I think we owe it to the to the poets themselves to just recall their names. And so here's a list of them. May their memory be a blessing. So the next poem is a poem by Miriam Ulinover. And we'll talk about Miriam Ulinover in a moment when we talk about the other collection. But this poem is called Girl Without Soap. And as I sit so desolate, worn out by poverty, the inspiration came to me to create a song of need. Heavy is my shirt with worries. One has to do the wash. The weaves becoming yellowed, close to, and the rest is illegible in that line. It bends my brain with worry and presses like a canker. If only the storekeeper would give me soap on credit. No, he did not give it. Stiff as starch he was. Just for my pretty dark eyes, he does not give any soap. I am estranged from fresh white wash. My laundry is gray with dirt, though my body longs to sing the song of a fresh, clean shirt. Miriam Ulunora, and we'll talk about her in a moment because she appears in both collections, as do a number of the poets. The next poem is called Prayer by Itzhak Manger. Now, Itzhak Manger was born in Chernovich, and he wrote poems in Warsaw between 1928 and 1938. He actually was in Paris when the Nazis invaded, and he fled to London. He arrived in Israel in 1958, and he died in Tel Aviv. And so there are some of these poets in the Poetry in Hell collection who actually survived, but their poems were important to the Oinig Shabbos Society and to the people in Warsaw, and so they were collected and saved in the milk cans because they were part of the popular culture then. Tefillah. Ich will es tun, die Schicht von dem Treue, und kommen zu dir zurück, Otta so, wie ich bin, verspielter, und stellen sich vor dein Blick. Mein Gott, mein Herr, mein Beschaffet, leiter mich aus in dein Schein, und blick ich vor dir auf Wolken, verwick mich und schläfer mich ein. Und red zu dir mir gute Werte, und sag mir, als ich bin dein Kind, und kusch mir herab von dem Stern, die Zeichens von meiner Sind. Ich hab doch getan dein Sliches und getragen dein göttlich Lied. Sie bin ich denn schuldig, was schrammt sich, alpi treues Jid mit Lied. Sie bin ich denn schuldig, was schrammt sich, alpi treues Schein mit Gewehen. Und die Bankschaft, die emmese Bankschaft, wolkt geseder allein. Sie bin ich denn schuldig der Leuchter, was bin jetzt erschlagen und mit, und leg dir weg zu Fußens, das dosige Miederlied. mein Gott, mein Herr, mein Beschaffer, leiter mich aus in dein Schein, und lieg ich bei dir auf a Wolken, verwick mich und schläfer mich ein. I will take off my shoes and my sorrow, and will return to you in my plight. Now that I know I'm a loser, I will stand before you in your sight. My God, my Lord and Creator, purify me in your light. Here I lie on a cloud before you. Rock me and lull me to sleep. And speak to me words of kindness, and tell me that I am your child, and kiss away from my forehead all of the signs of my sins. I have faithfully carried the message of your sacred songs throughout time. So is it my fault that in Yiddish, song and Jew happen to rhyme? And is it a fault I must own that beauty rhymes with tears, and that longing with sorrowful wings and wanders alone with her pain? So is it my fault you've allowed me to be downhearted and tired so long, and to come before you to lay at your feet this very dispirited song? My Lord, my God, my Creator, purify me in your light. Here I lie on a cloud before you. Rock me and lull me to sleep. So our final song from the Poetry in Hell collection is by Zusman Segelovich. Now, Zusman was born in Bialystok into a family of rabbis, but he was active in the Bund. So he wrote and published many poems. He lived in Lodz and later in Warsaw, and he became vice president of the Yiddish Literary Union. He left Warsaw in 1939 and arrived in Palestine in 1941. He died suddenly alone in his hotel room in New York in September 1948, carrying the destruction of his people and language in his heart. Like a miracle, Zusman Segelovich. Und doch ist es schön wie ein Nest, als das rosene Zweigele Beis, a viele in unsere Tag, von Beser der Wartung und Schreck, a viele bei uns auf dem Gas, wenn's sich mit Chutzpe der Hass, es zieht sich das Zweigele Beis zu dir und zu mir wie ein Nest. And still, it is beautiful as a miracle, this rosy twig of lilac, even in our days of evil terror and dread. Even in our street, when hate swells grand with chutzpah, the little lilac twig stretches out to you and to me like a miracle. One of the benefits of publishing this material online is that it's discoverable. And there was a band that formed during the pandemic called Levyosin. And they sent me an email and said, oh, we saw your poem by Segelovich called Like a Miracle, and we put it to song. And so I'll now play their song, Like a Miracle.
Und aus Rosa wird Zweigele best, a vielen unsere Träg, von Beise der Wartung und Schreck, a vielen unsere Tag. A viele bei uns auf der Gass, wenn's größer mit Chutzpe der Hass, es zieht sich das Zweigele Beis
this lilac stem like a miracle,
a feeling unsere Zeit,
and even this terrible year
von Weise der Erwartung und Schreck,
of evil foreboding and fear,
even this terrible year, and still it is beautiful, this lilac stem like a miracle, and even this terrible year of evil foreboding and fear, even this terrible year, and even on our own streets where hatred and terror increase, this beautiful lilac stem, its rosy blossom extends to you and to me like a miracle, to you and to me like a miracle. And even on our own streets, where hatred and terror increase, this beautiful lilac stem, its rosy blossom extends to you and to me like a miracle, to you and to me like a miracle. Und doch ist es schön wie ein Nest,
und aus Rose wird Zweige lebes,
und doch ist es schön wie ein Nest,
und aus Rose wird Zweige lebes.
So let's fast forward from 2010 to 2021. In 2010, when Poetry in Hell was published, Mom was 82. She was very sprightly and active. But it's been my observation that people tend to slow down a bit in their late 80s. And in 2021, at age 93, Mom was diagnosed with early Alzheimer's dementia. As part of her treatment prescription, her medical specialist suggested that she embark on a project that would fully engage her mind. Now, about this time, she rediscovered a book on her shelf that her father had given her. Das Lied ist geblieben, The Song Remains. This was a collection of poems collected by Beanham Heller, and we'll talk about him in a moment. She tried to find these poems online, but couldn't, and found that very few of them had been translated. And she found her project. She asked me if I would help her publish these poems online again, the same way we did with Poetry in Hell. And of course, I couldn't say no. I thought it was a fantastic idea. And I would rectify all of the mistakes we made the first time on the website, as you do. And so the concept for The Song Remains was born. So over the next 3 years, Mom diligently translated each of the poems from Yiddish into English. She woke up early every morning, like 6 o'clock, and she'd get up and go to her table and start work on translation. She started on page 1 and went right the way through the entire book. Every once in a while, she'd call me up and say, "There's a word, I don't know it. It's not in any Yiddish that I know, and it's not in any of my dictionaries. Can you help me figure it out?" And normally these were loan words from Polish or Ukrainian or some other language. And so, I'd go and do my research online, and eventually I'd get back to her and say, "Well, I think it means this," and she would put that into the poem. But we always managed to break through these things and figure them out together. So we released the initial website of The Song Remains almost exactly a year ago in May 2024. We had a wonderful launch event online, which included short presentation from, amongst others, Holocaust Center CEO at the time, Gillian Vess, the Polish ambassador to New Zealand, Yiddish Book Center founder Aaron Lansky, Professor Giacomo Lichner here at Victoria University, Miri Corral from the California Institute for Yiddish Culture and Language, the Toronto Workmen's Circle, and others. You can view that launch event online on the website, thesongremains.org, if you're interested. And the video includes several musical pieces that were based on poems from the collection. And I want to thank the Holocaust Center again for your support and involvement in that launch and all of the moral support that you've given me over the years for actually working on these poems. So we've been publishing poems for about a year. So that's we have around 65 poems published at the moment, which leaves another 100. So we'll finish sometime in 2027. And you can subscribe on the website to get one Yiddish poem in your inbox every week. And it's all free. So this is Beenam Heller, the anthologist, who put together the book, Das Lied is geblieben, that we just saw a moment ago. It was published in 1951 by the Polish government in their enterprise called Yiddish Book. They had their own government press that they decided to devote to publishing Yiddish material. Beenam Heller managed to survive the war, and he wanted to give tributes to all of the poets who were murdered by the Nazi. Heller was a poet himself, and he had known many of these poets personally. His introduction to the book is very idealistic. Many of the poets had held out the hope of communism as the antidote to Nazism, and Heller and others viewed the Soviet takeover of Poland at the end of the war as a godsend, and they thought that life was going to be wonderful now. So let me read you a little fragment from his introduction. The Jewish petty bourgeoisie were very impoverished and then exterminated, while the youth became the new proletariat. A large number of poets identified with the proletariat, and the greatest number of poems are dedicated to the fight against fascism, especially among poets such as Shudrich, Olitsky, Lis, Baruch Gelman, Yud Lamed Cohen, and others. They witnessed firsthand the popular democratic fatherland and gave up their lives with blood from the heart. But other poets far from the progressive movement succumbed to reactionary influences. The ones who identified as apolitical have also brought their poems into print, and they often sang about labor strikes and hunger demonstrations, and that's natural. Heller continues, they did not expect that their creations would be published and honored by the new Polish government. We took these works out from under the ruins, from poets, both known and unknown before the war. With a sense of trembling and fear, everyone should take this book in hand and sing out these poems from previously silent lips so that together we can lead the people into socialism. May these poems strengthen us in this difficult fight against those who are now liberating the Nazis, the murderers of our poets, who are preparing to repeat the terrible deeds of 1939 to 45. Only in this way will these poems live forever. History was to betray the high hopes for these survivors. The doctor's plot in the early 1950s, in which a group of doctors, mostly Jewish, from Moscow were arrested and tortured and falsely accused of attempting to assassinate the Soviet leadership, revealed the inherent anti-Semitism in Stalin's Soviet Union. Heller moved to Paris in the late 1950s, where he published a poem of political renunciation, which was called, Alas, How They Shattered My Life, which caused a storm of controversy. A year later, he made Aliyah and lived in Israel until his death in 1988. He was a poet himself, as I said, and if you're a Chava Alberstein fan, you'll know one of his poems, Mein Schwester Chaya, which is much beloved, and Tommy sings it very beautifully as well. So thank you, Tom. Good to see you. There are 36 or Lamed Vav poems in the collection, poets in the collection, and between them, they have over 160 poems. So here are the poets. that are in the collection. And again, may their memory be a blessing. The first poem we'll read out today is from Borch Gelman. Now, he was born in Vigi, near Vilnius, and Vigi is now in Belarus. He wrote for many publications, including the Neue Volkszeitung and a bunch of others. He moved to Warsaw in 1936 and lived there until 1939. When the Nazis invaded Poland, he escaped back to Vidje, but was killed there with his 5 brothers and sisters in a pogrom in 1941. So I'll only read the first stanza of this poem in Yiddish, and then I'll read the rest in English. And by the way, this is this week's poem. We just published this on Monday, so it's current. In unser verarmter Stub, in our poor house, wat da sei wie sickende Schiff, in a tiefen und qualligen Jam, is gesunken, sich wackelndig mid, unser Stibbel in Elend und Pain. Und wie hungrige Hint, auf a ledenke Mark in a Gräuen vernacht, seinen Mäs über Stub umgelaufen, geschnappt mit a stechig Gewein. Like a sinking ship in a deep wavy sea, my little home sank unsteady and alone. And like hungry dogs in an empty market, mice ran around crying steadily at night. And there in the sweaty old smelly corner, there was a big steadily growing spiderweb spinning, on the shoulders of my father's worries a net of the large old rusty broken sewing machine. This is the way father lived his lonely isolation, years of sewing with quiet pain, creating dirty work clothes, old ceremonial garments, for a little piece of dry bread, for a bowl of poor food. There was never a smile on his yellowed face, because he never owned that or a reason to smile. In his house, children went hungry like starved swallows in a nest, and like in cards, there was often everyone's sad loss. Gelman wrote some very funny poems too, and if we have some time at the very end, I'll read you another one. Now, the next poet we've already heard from, Miriam Ulanova. So Miriam Ulanova, née Hirschbein, lived from 1890 to 1944. She was born in Lodz, educated traditionally, and finished Volksschule. She was one of a very few Orthodox Jewish women poets in her time. As she was orphaned young, she was raised by her beloved grandmother. Ulanova was a very popular poet in Lodz, and she wrote about everyday things. She was published in newspapers and produced one book of poetry called Mein Bobbes Oitze, My Grandmother's Treasure, in Warsaw in 1922. Ulanova remained productive in the Lodz ghetto and encouraged young writers in a salon at her home. She was transported to Auschwitz during the liquidation of the Lodz ghetto and was gassed and incinerated a few days later in 1944. Über Nacht, overnight. Was hat sich das mit meiner Hor gemacht? Geschehen a Wunder plötzlich über Nacht. Gewehen a Knäuel a Blonder, schwer und hart. Und heint mit einmal glanzig, glatt und zart. Gewehen a Plonter, kurz, gedicht und wild. Und heint zerflossen bis zum Knechtel mild. Und heint wie Gold zerschmolten und zerglitt die Hor, was oben auf dein Herz geritt. What has happened to my hair? A wonder suddenly happened there. There was a blonde knot, cold and hard, and overnight it's smooth and smart. There was a knot, short, thick and wild, and today it's long, smooth and mild. And today, like melted gold, it parts, my hair that rested on your heart. Another poem of hers called The Testament, Die Zavoye. Gute Nacht auf dir, mein Städtel, und a guten Tommet. Zieh es räuscht von Bäumer Blättel, zieh Goss singt der Ummet. Spät, es ruhen alte Treppen, es krach schon nicht kein Schappel. Sie nimmt der Teut die Augenkleppen, ich sog alles Tramappel. Lehnt mein zweies Zettel, morgen an Ummet. Und dem Holz, was kommt mein Bettel, steht in Schuh an Ummet. Wird ihr morgen mich gegroben, geht zerhackt mein Bettel und geht mit das Holz zu Boben auf a kvure Bettel. Lang verfoilt ist kvure Bettel, sie steht bis itzt der Ummet. Gute Nacht auf meine Bobbesstättel und a guten Tommet. Good night to you, my little village, and a good forever. Does a leaf rustle on the tree, or does sorrow sing everywhere? It's late. Old steps are at rest. Nothing squeaks anywhere. Death closes its eyes as I say a last prayer. Read my will tomorrow without fear, and from the wood of my bed there is a Torah stand. You will bury me tomorrow. Go take wood from my bed and give it to my grandmother to mark her grave's head. Long ago this wood has rotted. The Torah stand still waits. Good night to my Bubby's village, and a good forever. Our next quote is Misha Troyanov, which was a pen name for Moshe Troyanov, Moshe Troyanovsky. He was born in the Wrocław Groźnictanie Bridgin and later lived in Łódź and then Warsaw. He had a religious education. He worked as a tutor, a business agent, and a storehouse employee. His literary work appeared in a number of Yiddish newspapers. He was killed by the Nazis in Otwock in 1942 on the 19th of August. This poem is called Actually, Actualia. Vermacht den Stub, häng an dem Schloss. Es billen hint Bese in finsterer Stadt. Es billen hint Bese in finsterer Stadt und wecken über Kinder Kleine mit der Gewehen. Die, was Sehnen von lang schon vertreuert, wollen noch treuer sein. Es peuzen sich Händ auf unsere Hemen und Steine schwere setzen aus die Scheiben. Es gucken zu die Sternen, die nachtliche Schäumerin, wie es ziehen sich Händ zu morden, zu räuben. Vermacht den Stub, häng an dem Schloss, es billen hint Bese in finstere Stadt. Verhängt die Fenster, zint an der Licht, verlegt die Hand auf ein Gesicht, vergartelt die Lenden in Beser Schau und verhalt dem Atem. Close your doors, lock all up. Mad dogs are howling in this dark city. Mad dogs are howling in this dark city, waking little children, making them cry. Those who long have been saddened will even sadder be. Fists are raised over our homes. Heavy stones break our windows. The stars of night see hands reaching out to murder, to rob. Close your doors, lock all up. Mad dogs are howling in this dark city. Darken your windows, light a lamp. Fold your hands over your eyes. Gird your loins in this mad hour. And hold your breath. Motul Kozlovsky. We don't have any photos of poor Motul Kozlovsky. He was born in Pshishke. He had a traditional education and worked as a tailor. and he published a number of poems, and he was deported from the Lodz ghetto and died in Auschwitz. This poem is called Nurses. Krankenschwester. Krankenschwester haben blaue Augen, wie der Himmel im später Frühling. Der Blind von sehr weiße Kleider schneit durch die Schwere, umhemmig der Luft. Auf sehr Lippen ruht ein milder, mutterlicher Schmeichel. Krankenschwester seien wie spilledicker Sonnenstrahl, was tänzt dich in der Mittentag und verjäugt die Schottens von der Wind. A stille Tefille nach der Lesung trifft unsere Hand und fühlt uns alle Winkeln in Spital. Nurses have blue eyes like the color of late spring sky. The dazzle of their white dresses cuts through the heavy, strange air. On their lips greets a gentle, motherly smile. Nurses are like playful sun rays. They dance gently at midday and drive shadows on the walls away. A quiet prayer after being liberated drips from their hands and fills all corners of the hospital. Kalman Lis was born in Kovel, Volhynia, in modern-day Ukraine, to a family of rural roots. He studied in Cheder and then at gymnasium, and he specialized in the care of special needs children. From 1937 until his death, he was in charge of the Centos Institution for Defective Children in Otwosk, near Warsaw. He began publishing in his school years. He moved to Warsaw in 1927, and in 1930, his first book was Lieder, the first international anthology of Yiddish modern poetry. He was to have been given the Yudlamed Peretz Award for Young Poets, but the presentation never happened because of the war. He recovered in a Warsaw hospital and then returned to Otwock, to the Children's Institution. When it was attacked by Germans in 1942, he and some of the children ran away, but his hiding place was found, and he was shot and killed together with the children. And here's his song about little children. Hentelech, little hens. So hat sich mir das Leben heint geeckt, zu all die Ruches as a Leben. So haben blaue Kinder euch geträgt. Hentelech, ich soll sie etwas geben. Hentelech, geschwollene von Kält, mit sin Jackes auf jeden einen Finger, wollte ich abgegeben sie mein ganze Welt, wollte ich sie geschenkt, allein das Singen. Betten aber kinderlich auf Breut, was je keine Dichter Kinder geben, bleibt nur eins zusammen mit der Neut, diesen letzten Tropfen Blut für neuem Leben. So hat sich mir das Leben heint geeckt, zu all die Ruiches as a Leben, so haben blaue Kinder euch geträgt. Hinterlich, ich soll sie etwas geben. Today, my life came to an end. To hell with such a life as I am living. I saw blue children, little hands outstretched, begging for something to be given. Little hands all swollen from the cold, bruised blue on every single finger. I would give them my whole world. Would I could give them just the singing. But little children ask only for bread. What then can a poet give to children? Only to be bound as one in hardship, till the last drop of blood for a new life. Today, my life has come to an end. To hell with such a life that I am living. I saw blue children, little hands outstretched, begging for something to be given. On 1 September 2024, at age 97, my mother, Dr. Sarah Traister Moskovitz, took her own life through medical aid in dying. It was a really beautiful experience, and you can read about this on my blog. She died happily and peacefully with her family around her. Zingen Shir und Brachas. I promised her that I would continue to publish her work until it was completed sometime in 2027. So in the last year since our launch, we've had about 2,600 visitors to the website. We have 180 subscribers who get poems every week. It's not huge. Again, this is obscure material. I regularly receive emails from people who are touched by the beauty of these poems. I hope you've found some beauty and meaning in the poems we read today. And there are lots more online. So just look up poetryinhell.org and thesongremains.org and subscribe if you'd like a Yiddish poem in your inbox every week. So to finish, I'd like to finish with one of my mother's own poems in Yiddish. And it comes from her book, Come to the Table, Kommt zum Tisch. It's called December. Dezember. Bar Yiddish is Dezember. Nicht to kein Pripetschok, das kleine Feierl zankt und flattert nur in Heulen. Der Rebbe, was hat kleine kinderlich gelernt, ist zusammen mit den Kindern umgekommen, auf jener Seite Atlantik, in die große Feiern von Hass. Und da ist unser Jiddisch der Trunken geworden, in den quäldigen Räusch und Krach und Fletz von Massenkultur. Nicht all kein Beisäulen für der Sprache, nur für die einzelnen Redner und jedes Mal geworden eingestellt, nimmt mit sich ein Stückel Welt, a Koine von der jüdischen Gas, a Malamed's Mee, Mied, a Mames Lied, a Schwester's Treist, der Bruders Hilf und hunderter nicht erzählte Meselech ungeschenkte Matunis von 1000 Jahr jüdische Geschichte ausgekritzt. Wenn sie Latein gestorben, hat man vergettert sie in heilige Kirchen. Nicht auch kein heiliger Event zu bekoveden meine Jiddisch, nur ältere Professoren, was halten auf der Last von Millionen stumme Quorum als einzelner einsamer Gas in Abteilungen von Deutsch. For Yiddish, it's December. There's no more oven hearth. The small fire sinks and flames only in dreams. The Rebbe, teaching little children there, died with them together on the other side of the Atlantic in the great fires of hate. And here, Yiddish was drowned by roaring waves and crash and flood of mass culture. There is no cemetery for a language, only for each speaker, and every mouth becoming silent silences a piece of world. A client in the Yiddish street, a teacher's effort, a mother's song, a sister's comfort, a brother's help, and hundreds of untold stories, gifts ungiven, carved from 1,000 years of Yiddish history. When Latin died, she was sanctified in holy churches. There are no holy walls to honor my Yiddish, only lonely professors carrying the burden of millions of silent graves as alien guests in departments of German. So I hope you've enjoyed today's talk and can carry away some meaning, and you can look back at the websites for the poems if you're interested. And I will now open it up for questions or discussion.
Your mother's line, there is no cemetery for Yiddish, Superb, Dave. Are there any questions or any discussion whatsoever? Pat?
Yeah, thank you for the talk, first of all. Yeah, and I wonder, maybe you don't really have the answer to my question, which is absolutely fine, but did your mother ever tell you if there was anything in particular about her approach to the text of the poem, the way and the method in which she translated the text? Or maybe she said that there was something particularly important to her to preserve in the text while in the process of translation?
She never explicitly explained her methodology to me, but she would read over each poem several times, and then she would work from the beginning. She would start off with a fairly literal translation of the poem, but as you know, it's difficult to translate poetry, word for word. It just doesn't come out sounding right. So she would then revise the poem over a series of revisions, and then eventually decide that enough is enough. Genug ist genug und mehr ist ungesund, as she used to say. So, and particularly with the song Remains, her mental acuity was declining toward the end of the project. And I got the feeling that some of the poems, particularly toward the end of the book, are not in as polished a shape as she really would have liked, but they're good, and good enough is good enough. And so I don't know if that answers your question. And unfortunately, she's not around to ask anymore about her approach. So that's the best I can do. Sorry.
Thank you. That was really, it's making any noise? Okay, thank you. Okay, got it. Thank you. It was really beautiful. Just beautiful. This is kind of more of a personal question, if you don't mind. Can I ask, what's your relationship to the Yiddish language?
So Yiddish was spoken around my house when I was young, but typically when my parents didn't want me to understand what was going on. So Dad also did not speak a word of English until he went to public school. He grew up in Chicago. And so both Mom and Dad were very much steeped in the Yiddish language, and both sets of their parents were very strong Yiddishists. So I had what I call a broad spectrum Jewish education. I went to a Sunday school at a Reform synagogue. I had my bar mitzvah at a Reconstructionist synagogue, and I went to a conservative day school after high school 3 days a week. And so through that process, and the general Jewish enculturation, there's a fair amount of Yiddish culture. My favorite holiday, Pesach, we would sing into, pretty much most of the night. And all of my parents and their friends and their family who had immigrated from the Soviet Union all sang all of the songs that they knew in Yiddish. So my journey through Yiddish is mainly through song. I was a member of a band for over a decade, the Klezmer Rebs, as you know, and was a lead singer and sang mainly in Yiddish. And most of my knowledge, actual knowledge of the Yiddish language, comes through singing and understanding the language of song. And so I guess maybe my own linguistic sort of history is well suited for poetry, but I've never had any formal training in Yiddish. Mostly, I need a reasonable amount of help. Some of them are easier. Some of them are, it's like anything else, the level of language being used, how symbolic the imagery is, and all that sort of thing. Well, we're always learning.
Sorry, can I just ask a question from the chat first? And the chat wants to know, are there any remaining schools that teach Yiddish to children?
Sorry, are there any remaining? Yes, there are. Well, I'm not sure that there are universities where you can study Yiddish, and there are a number of online courses. Some of them are really good. So the Workman's Circle actually still runs online Yiddish courses. which you can do if you want the Bundist sort of take on the language. There are universities where you can study Yiddish, and as my mother says, in departments of German typically, which is Yiddish being a Germanic language, is taught in those departments. But in terms of like primary schools, Yiddish is typically restricted to the ultra-religious people, both in Israel and largely in New York, where between them, according to the statistics, are about 500,000 speakers who still speak Yiddish. So I've never been in one of these schools, and I can't tell you whether they have a Yiddish language class, whether they teach Yiddish as part of the curriculum. I don't really know. But certainly there are places where you can go. If you go to Mea Shearim in Jerusalem or to Brooklyn and hang out with Lubavitchers, you'll get quite a lot of Yiddish. And it's very different from the sort of Bundist Yiddish of the pre-war, interwar period in Europe, as we were talking about, but it's still Yiddish. I don't know if that answers the question, but Mom translated nearly all of the poems before she died. There were a couple that were very difficult, almost free verse, that were left blank. And I nudged her a bit before she died and said, "Hey, Mom, you need to get on to these." I said, "Oh, they're too hard. I don't understand what they mean or what they're on about." But luckily, Miri Corral at UCLA, who runs the Center for Yiddish Culture and Language in Los Angeles, has taken on the job of editor, and she's going to be helping me over the next couple of years. I'm going to LA on Friday, and I'll be meeting with her as part of that trip. My parents are both having their headstone unveilings later on next week, and so I'm meeting with Mary, and we're going to put our heads together. She's translated one of the poems. One of the poems was a fairly garbled translation. Mary didn't like it, said I can do a better job, and so she went ahead, and I agreed that it was she did a beautiful job of translating this one poem, and so she's going to be helping polish the rest of the material.
There was a point, I understand, where there was argument about whether the state of Israel would use Yiddish or not. And I just wondered if the workman's circle had thoughts on that, or your family or whatever.
It's a very complicated question. And I'm not sure that I am academically sophisticated enough to give you a good answer. But certainly many of the Bundists were anti-Zionist. And so they didn't really care one way or the other what happened in Israel, because it wasn't important to them. The Linke Peletzion, who were very active in Israel, were, they believed in having a strong Yiddish language. But you have to remember that Israel is not only composed of Ashkenazi Jews, but there are quite a few Sephardim there as well. In fact, over half of the population of modern Israel can trace their roots back to the Sephardic roots from the Arab lands of Spain or Turkey or other places in the Middle East. So I think most people got behind establishing Hebrew as the language of the state of Israel after 1948. Anybody want to argue with me? How unusual.
Hello, we met very recently at the Anglican Cathedral on Molesworth Street. And I then had the opportunity of telling you that I had actually met your mother. I was the secretary of the World Federation of Jewish Child Survivors of the Holocaust and Descendants. And on that occasion that I met her, she came to talk to us. And she was talking about children. What happened to the children? Some of us who were children know what happened. And I feel very moved and a little bit dazed by everything that you've said. And I want to thank you very, very much for that. And it's strange to be having this conversation in this room with people we have known around us, and to know that children are out there. There are children out there, and there are ghost-like figures moving behind these screens. So very moving. All the feelings that we've associated with. I'm particularly moved by the story of the little lavender leaf. And that leaf was just like the butterfly that we longed for in Terezin. And that's what keeps people going, a glimpse of something beautiful. Connection with other people, sharing. So I could go on, but I do feel very, very physically touched by everything you have said. So thank you for continuing to tell your mother's story. I've just done something myself. I thought at one point there's enough of this testimony talking about these stories and children and so on, but I have just done something for Giacomo Lichtner, which I will broadcast more widely. And I'm encouraged by the fact that your mother, till the very end, wanted to keep the stories alive through the poetry. So that's my bit. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dave, thank you so much. I wondered whether you would be prepared to consider some of these poems being choreographed too. I danced The Last Butterfly. I was part of a production called Something to Remember Me By, taking the poems of children from Terezin, creating a kind of multimedia production in the late 1990s. And then in Vienna, another production based on the Diary of Anne Frank. And just hearing how there's so much power in these words, just wondering whether that might be a potential future possibility.
Absolutely. So all of the poems in the collection are licensed under the Creative Commons license scheme. So they're all free to copy and use with attribution. And this is when we were doing poetry and how I had a long conversation with Mom about licensing. And I myself am very much an open culture sort of person and believe that it's kind of hard to copyright stuff and prevent it from being used in different ways. And look, she was never going to get rich off of the royalties from this. So why not just let it free and out into the world? So all of the material is licensed under the Creative Commons licenses, and you should feel that I know that I would feel very, very honored in my mother's memory if this work were to appear in other forms. When I got the call from Liv Yosin, oh, by the way, we've made a song from one of the poems on the website, it was like, wow, when this stuff is going to become popular in different ways, in new ways, in unexpected ways. And that's the beauty of art, is that it has that potential to expand meaning into unknown spaces. So absolutely. Go nuts, Katie.
Any other points for discussion at all? Oh, yes, sorry to make you wait.
Do you know anything more about the portion of the archive which was not unearthed that you mentioned that was under an embassy? Or any discussion around that?
So only 3 members of the Ornig Shabbos Society have survived. And as I said before, it was a very secretive endeavor, and people didn't know who the other members of the society were, except for Ringelblum, who was controlling the organization, and a couple of others. So I don't believe much is known about the material that was lost, sadly. There are a couple of online exhibits. Yad Vashem has an exhibit on the Ringelblum archive, which is worth looking at. The U.S. Holocaust, sorry, not the U.S. one, the Melbourne Holocaust Museum recently ran an exhibition on the Ringelblum archive, which I was fortunate enough to go over and see. And so you can find out more information, and some information is available about the other material in the archive. It's very, very interesting. I mean, you know, the poetry is great, but there's all sorts of photographs and posters and ration cards and, you know, all sorts of other things from daily life in the ghetto. It's really fascinating. So I encourage people to explore that if they're interested. It's easy enough to find online. Bernie.
Right, okay.
Thank you, Dave. I wonder what your mother would be saying today if she knew that here in Wellington, New Zealand, you're giving a talk to an assembled group here and to those online and continuing with the work that she did. My mother had an expression which was, a person never dies as long as people speak about them. And that's what you've been doing today. I want to thank you for sharing. And it's probably the first time you've spoken to a group about your mother's poetry. I've listened on a couple of occasions to your mother's talks online, and anybody can do that just by putting your mother's name in there and listening to her message. What a remarkable person. And I thank you for sharing that with us today.
Thank you. I feel Mom's presence all the time. She's with me regularly. And I know that she's very pleased that we're here talking about the poetry in particular, but also about her translations.